I'm Parul Singh. I'm a partner at Initialized Capital. Tonight we're joined by Runway, Rippling, and also a fantastic product that we all know and love as a guest speaker, Superhuman. Without further ado, would love to invite up Siki, Brad, and Andrew.
Andrew, if you could tell us what your background is and how you got into finance for everybody.
Hey everybody, my name's Andrew Meyer, and I am the head of finance at Superhuman. Been there for about 2.5 years. Before Superhuman, I spent the last, decade plus on the East Coast out of Boston at a startup called Level Up. I was with them for about 7-8 years. We got acquired by another company, Grubhub. Was there for about 2 years. Grubhub got acquired by a large international company called Just Eat Takeaway. And so I've had a chance to kind of seen the growth journey from Level Up post-Series B, sub 10 million in annualized revenue, all the way up to Grubhub at over $2 billion a year in revenue. And yeah, how'd I get into it? I was a MBA student in Boston and stumbled upon an internship at a startup, which, circa 2011, that sounded pretty cool. So that started it off.
Great. So I've always heard about finance and had finance business partners like gave me spreadsheets and said, here's your headcount or whatever. Like a couple of years ago, I started hearing about strategic finance, and I'm still not sure what that is.
I would like to know as well.
Coined by finance people to get better titles and better money? Or
Is
there actually something happening there that's different in what finance has always done?
Yeah. I think I think over my career at least, finance generally has been some elements of finance, maybe accounting, far more back office. I think over time, really needing to sit sort of, kind of hand in hand with an executive team, with the CEO, as they think through, especially now in the last 24 months, this environment. And so finance, has just had to get deeper into the business. And so in that sense, strategic in the sense that partnering with all parts of the business to help them understand problems, frame problems. But also to help us, make us feel important and sound cool.
It's good. It's good that finance feels important. The last 24 months or so, it's been really, challenging time for a lot of tech companies, obviously. And I think, this hits finance in particularly hard because you're having to make the tough recommendations that looks into a very murky crystal ball and go, how are we going to invest in the business? How are we going to conserve our capital? To steer the company in the right direction and given a pretty uncertain future. So how has the last 2 years been for you and for kind of colleagues in similar roles in dealing with that?
Yeah, it's definitely been uncertain. I think previously in like a ZIRP environment and in a low interest rate environment, finance had the luxury of maybe more so like reporting the news. So we were able to kind of report the score of what was happening, a little bit lower stakes. Anything that had positive ROI was probably fair game. That changed pretty dramatically in 2022. And now I'd say finance is more so kind of, we're on the field, calling plays on the field, hand in hand with like the rest of the team, and trying to figure out what do we need to do, in terms of like hard decisions, in terms of headcount and resource allocation, in terms of different trade-offs. And that always obviously existed within finance to some degree, but I think the pressure is really amped up.
Can you paint us a picture of what your day-to-day was when you first got into finance? Like, what were you responsible for? What kind of tools were you using? How did it feel?
So when I first got into finance, again, this was back 2011. So I was at a small startup. So we were post-Series B, a little under 10 million in annualized revenue. And really it was, a very immature finance and accounting org. So it was myself and another staff accountant. And so, I think this is, with any company, kind of dependent on sort of that finance team's sort of maturity, we were kind of starting from scratch. And so very much bedrock. It was, how do we make sure that we can actually close the books? Is it accurate? Timely? We'll eventually get there. But, and so from there, sort of building upon, I think a strong sort of accounting kind of bedrock foundation, starting to then think through, starting to partner slightly with other teams really around kind of sales and marketing. What are the right investments to make? But again, it was a team of two, and a relatively small company at the time. And then in terms of tools, it was spreadsheets. This was before Google Sheets, so spreadsheets, Excel all day, every day.
And what is the role of a head of finance today look like? How has it changed?
It's great. Get up at 11. How's it changed?
Still using Excel.
Yeah, actually, no. Years ago, I made the switch, and this kills me, because I used to be able to take my mouse, turn it upside down, just do hotkeys in Excel. I made the switch to Google Sheets a couple years ago, probably 7 years ago. So no more Excel. But now there are tools, like Runway, that even get me out of Sheets.
Runway?
Tell me more.
Yeah. But in terms of what does a day look like for head of finance? It is a mixture of making sure that the trains run on time. So those monthly closes, quarterly planning, annual planning, quarterly filings, annual filings, those things have to happen. And there's a pretty strict cadence to it. And then on the flip side, it's working with the rest of the leadership team to help solve problems and kind of be sort of that strategic partner. But really just dealing with ambiguity. And in this environment, there's a lot of it.
So without naming any names, people who do your role have to work with a lot of very precocious startup CEO, founder types who are very different from finance people. What did they get most wrong about what you do? What's most fun and what's most frustrating about your relationship with some people who are founders or operators?
I think less so in my experience, but I could imagine, I think finance people there's potentially a stereotype or like a archetype. And I think, back to sort of that strategic piece, I think there are a lot of very creative finance individuals that want to work closely with parts of the business and that can add a lot of value. I think at times, a finance person or like an accountant can kind of get put in a certain sort of stereotype. And then on the flip side, working with founders and other operators, I think an unwillingness to kind of change behaviors. Like ultimately, if you have someone who's far more creative and maybe more of like a product visionary, and someone that's trying to make sure that we can make payroll and keep the lights on, there has to be some middle ground that we can reach, and like it requires both parties to probably step outside of their comfort zone.
There's a lot of founders in the audience tonight through Initialized and just through this audience. I'm curious, probably many of you are like Series A, maybe going to Series B, thinking about a first like financial hire or general business management hire. Like, what would you say someone should look out for in a candidate if they're trying to hire for like that first person who's not building the product, who's not taking the product to market, the first person really looking after the business? What type of background and what type of characteristics do you think they should look out for?
Yeah, that's a great question. In my experience, usually looking for someone who's been an operator in obviously like a finance context. So someone that's probably worked at other Series A, B, C plus size and stage companies. There's a lot of great folks in financial services. There's a lot of great folks in investment banking. But I think coming over as your first role, it's just different. It's a different skill set in those specific industries than, again, making sure that payrolls run, making sure that that we're closing the books monthly, making sure that ideally, I think it's finding someone who's done that before and potentially has sort of grown up in that environment, or at least has had at least one other sort of opportunity there.
Yeah, I think someone who's not coming from a bank directly is probably a good bet.
Yeah.
So for the audience, I think some of the subtext to this conversation and this assemblage is that Superhuman is a common customer for Runway and Rippling. They use Rippling for their HR stuff, for their IT stuff, for a whole bunch of services, and Runway for financial planning. And we have a partnership with Runway where it's very unique in terms of bringing Rippling data over to Runway, because Rippling is the source of truth for employee record, and the employee data is probably the biggest expenditure you have on a day-to-day basis, and that changes all the time as you hire and as you fire people and do those things. So I guess you use these products on a day-to-day level. It's how you forecast and manage your business. Maybe you can talk about the value you're seeing kind of in this integrated system and this bundle that is Rippling and Runway.
Yeah. So previously managed our operating model, so our forecasts, budget. That was all within spreadsheets. And then also manage all of our sort of budget hires in spreadsheets. And then the mapping of trying to make sure each month, as folks came and left, that what we have in the model versus what's on budget hire versus someone that's now showed up and is in Rippling and getting paid, that all synced. Such a low value. Obviously, the output is high value and is necessary, but the actual act of making sure that that's maintained is such a pain in the butt. And now we use Runway for all of our forecasting and budgeting, and for maintaining sort of that sort of rec level list of all those budget hires. And it beautifully syncs with Rippling, which has all of our actual when the people are hired and show up. And so within just a couple clicks, that all that pain goes away. And so I can easily update everything because Runway is integrated with Rippling, it's integrated with our GL, it's integrated with our data warehouse. It's so easy to kind of that sort of that maintenance and that upkeep. Just a lot of probably in a given month, tens if not hundreds of hours of just low value work, administrative work that just goes away.
Yeah, that's what we're going for, right?
I'm Runway and I approve this message. I guess I imagine Rippling and Runway is not the first platform that you use of this type. Mm-hmm. Can you walk us through what it was like and what did you enjoy about some of the other things you use and what didn't work for you that made you choose either Rippling or something like Runway?
Yeah, that's a great question. So in prior roles and prior places, I have used ADP, which if you want to not enjoy yourself, try digging through ADP reports for a 401k audit. God bless you. It will be painful. And I think for us again, we use Rippling not just for our HRS, but for IT. The number of workflows that we've built now within Rippling, it automates a bunch of stuff. So it's far beyond just payroll. But yes, have used ADP before, and that has generally not been an enjoyable experience. And then on the more kind of FP&A sort of planning side, at the last startup that I was at, we used almost exclusively Sheets, which by the end got a little bit crazy. And then at Grubhub, we used Anaplan. And I was telling someone today, before the talk tonight, when we were using Anaplan, it was a 3,000 person company. We had one person on the finance team that actually managed our instance of Anaplan solely. And then whenever it was time to make an update, or update a new scenario, it was all hands off. No one could touch Anaplan. Make that update. Okay, now you're good to use it again. And it was just I think some of it is we had customized it into a Frankenstein of probably how you should use it. But it was just painful. I mean, truly, we would have to stop working for an update to happen. And then we could start working again.
That seems fine. So one of the things that we really believe deeply at Runway is this idea that finance is not about finance. It's about everything that happens in a business. I'm curious, how has getting the rest of the organization interested in what you do, understanding the business, how has that evolved since you started? How much do people care before and how much do they care now about what you do? Do they even know what you do?
Yeah. I think, I guess for better or for worse, with sort of the change in the macroeconomic environment back in 2022, finance became real front and center very, very quickly that summer of 2022. And I'm sure, I hope previously people cared about what finance was doing. But I think it was less of a necessity. As things changed, as there was questions as to when would that next round come, would it come, how much cash do we have, can we make payroll, how much runway do we have, finance kind of became front and center. So it dramatically kind of changed sort of, I think, the role of finance within a company. And also for myself, having to kind of, help calm the room and help let folks know, hey, we do have a plan. There's a lot of optionality here. We have a lot of, there's a lot of things we can do. But definitely, I think that really accelerated sort of that change.
To that point, I think a lot of people inside out finance, CEO finance is a very sensitive, opaque thing. You don't want everyone to see your salaries. You don't want everyone to see the cash balance. How do you think about who gets to see what and to what level of transparency is appropriate for finance and the rest of the team? Yeah.
I've been fortunate enough to work both at Superhuman as well as sort of previous startups, pretty transparent. And at Superhuman, very transparent with this is where we are in terms of ARR growth, this is cash balance, this is runway, this is our NRR. We don't share salary data. I've definitely heard of, and I know folks at other companies that have sort of also taken that step. That one feels a little bit like a Pandora's box. Or just, I think you can do it. I think you can do it successfully. It just is going to require a lot of, cycles to help sensitize the rest of the org as to kind of what that means. But yeah, outside of comp data, we're very open.
And that's one of the things that the Rippling integration does pretty well is like all of your permissions are based on your role in Rippling, and so therefore, if you share out a sheet in Runway with the Rippling integration, it'll basically give you the right data. So you're not seeing, if you want to share people's salaries, go for it. But the last thing you want to do is inadvertently share people's salaries. We all know that's not going to land well. So I think that's another kind of benefit that we've kind of solved.
Yeah, we actually have in our Runway instance, I have a page, which is basically a dashboard, for every executive leader at Superhuman with all of their forecasted initiatives, revenue, expenses, including salary data. And it's sort of a one-stop shop. And I meet with leaders once a week. Yep. And it is nice to know that, like, as I've exposed parts of salary data to parts of the org, other folks don't have visibility into that.
Execs are jealous, just in general.
I did not know that.
Yeah.
That is cool.
Yeah.
I have a question for you. See, I mean, you've built products in a lot of different spaces, and curious what drove you to this and kind of your observations.
What led me to do this company?
Yeah.
I was tired of losing. But okay, more seriously.
Unpack that.
Well, I mean, if we want to get spicy, SaaS is just easier than consumer.
Yeah.
Like, you have to be really, really lucky, and your timing has to be really, really good to win in consumer. So for people who don't know me, this is my first B2B company of any kind. My last company was called Sandbox VR, and it is a retail VR gaming hardware company. Before that, I did a mobile app company, which we won't talk about. It's really sad. And before that, I did games, which was acquired by Zynga. So I've never done any kind of business software at all. I am having more fun, and this is more enjoyable, and this is working better than any other company I've done. So it's kind of easier, is the honest truth. But there is a real reason why I'm doing this, because two triggers. One is I've always had this really deep sense of insecurity about not being any kind of business person. I remember in my first company in 2008, I had a Harvard MBA on my team. I was a year out of school, and I was getting these spreadsheets from him, and I had no idea what any of them meant. And then fast forward a couple of years later, I was a VP of growth and product at Postmates, and someone said contribution margin one time, contribution margin. And I said, what's that? And they said, it's literally one of the metrics your team is responsible for. I said, awesome. And then when I was at Sandbox, so I was appointed CEO 6 months through COVID, and we were just scenario planning on these spreadsheets. And long story short, I had to go from 500 people to 15 people because our revenue went down to 0. And I asked our CFO from Netflix, I said, there is something great we could have used here, right? Like, Figma's a thing, Notion's a thing, this is Excel. And he said, no, this is as good as it gets, so maybe someone should build something better. And I thought, that seems, the bar is on the floor on that one. Let's try it. And that's what led to Runway. Turns out it's really, really hard to build something like this. So don't do it. Thanks for the question, Brad. Actually, one question I am very curious about is, to what extent do you have the rest of your company, your non-leadership team, including your leadership team, understand how the business works and the different parts of it? Because one of the things we observe with a lot of companies is that the sales team has a model, the growth team has a model, the product team has a model. None of them talk to each other. Yep. How do you solve that?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we also have kind of separate models within Runway for various teams. And I think on the leadership level, there's pretty good insight across the board. What I want to do with our next instance of quarterly planning for Q3 is start to bring more folks in. And ultimately what it is, it's sort of, I think it's both transparency to let people sort of understand and see those different models, but also a bit of they need someone to be there to help kind of contextualize it and walk them through it. Yeah. And so, I think leadership down, it's probably a bit spotty if someone has sort of quite such a holistic view, but I'd like to kind of push that a bit, and ideally.
When we talk to people who work at companies, there's a lot of people who say, I really, really want to understand how the business works, and these numbers really matter. And then there are some people who say, I don't understand this at all, and I don't really care. Do you find that changing? What are you seeing in the teams that you work with?
I think to some degree it's the actual individual. In some ways, it's if they're curious enough that they want to start to understand a very different set of like a very different domain. I do think though in the last 24 months, people are definitely I think they feel like they should be concerned, and so that's sort of driving more questions. But in the same kind, it's presenting the opportunity for them to actually start to learn more and be better informed, and ideally not be so concerned.
Yeah, I'm good. Thank you guys. Great. Questions from the audience?
Brett mentioned that there were a number of people, there's probably a number of people here that are earlier than the B round. All right, so they're probably interested in things like product market fit and traction and getting initial revenue rather than unit economics. Yeah. I'm kind of curious, what perspectives can you share in relation to strategic finance's impact on cap table management and PP&L?
It's a pretty good question, actually.
Boy, and earlier than like a Series B?
Second?
It's sort of in the context of like earlier than like Series B.
Yeah, so like you think about people that are raising a seed or an A, like there's a whole bunch of interesting ways that you can get safes.
Yeah.
You can do YC, you can do Carter, you can do a bunch of others. Like how do you think about advising initial entrepreneurs on cap table management? And then also when you get a little bit further down the track, how you think about PP&L, in terms of like licensing things that you would advise on in terms of driving both revenue and unit economics and long term.
Gosh. Okay.
Objection, compound question.
Yeah, I think
Overruled.
some of this maybe we can chat after. But I think for early stage, seed stage, I mean, CK, I might actually turn to you. Generally, as a finance person, you probably don't have a head of finance at a seed or Series A. It's usually a post Series B kind of hire. I could speak to kind of thoughts on it, but someone who's probably gone through it a couple times.
Sure. I don't think it matters pre-product market fit at all. This is actually really common with early stage founders. I'm invested in a good number of companies, and one of the things that a first-time founder or a early stage pre-product market founder will do is they play the game of startup. And they do these things. You have an office, you have a business plan, you have a financial model. None of it fucking matters. And they also optimize for like ownership. And it's like, startups are really binary outcomes. If you make it, you will have a lot of money. Half of a lot of money is still a lot of money. And half of zero is still zero. And so the only thing that matters is getting to product market fit and making something people want. Everything else seems like a really waste of time. And so people actually come to us all the time at Runway saying, I want to get on Runway. And I say, okay, cool. What are you doing? How big is the company? It's like, oh, we don't really have it, but Runway seems really cool. I say, you should not be on Runway at all. We will not take your money, build something people want, and then Runway could be useful when it's working.
I used to advise companies on formation issues and voting structures and that kind of thing. And like my advice is generally like, don't do anything clever. Just vanilla, by the book. When you get product market fit and you have some leverage, maybe you can optimize things a little bit, but like make your company as investable as possible and therefore as vanilla as possible. And like in the last 20 years since I've been in Silicon Valley doing this stuff, like what is Runway, or just like what is kind of the standard safe path has become way more codified than it used to be. It used to be like, there weren't safes before. It was like you had some custom convertible note financing vehicle. Now it's like we know what it all looks like. We know what the MVCA docs looks like. You just do that and you focus on your product, and like that's where you're going to make this work or not.
Yeah, I mean, to riff on that a little bit, right? Like, the funny thing is, the first version of Runway was built for startups that are really small. And what it did is it took your general ledger and it did a really good job of automatically telling you where you spend your money and how much runway you had. The problem is, when you're a small company, all your money went into people. The next month, it went into people. The amount of money you're willing to pay for that no information is zero. And so it's really important to know that you're not going to run out of money or when you're going to run out of money, because the only thing all successful companies have in common is they're not dead. That's it. And so you want to not run out of money. But other than that, it doesn't matter.
How much headcount have you been able to pull out of your companies due to Rippling and the other two solutions?
That's a great question. We haven't exited anybody because we've adopted these tools, but I think it's more sort of a slowed rate of hiring. So to try, I think we run a pretty lean finance and accounting team. We are 3 folks, and again, like I cover most FP&A efforts, and then I have another person that helps. If I was doing this, not leveraging these tools, I imagine we need at least another person or 2 on that.
Yeah, we did a third-party study. This is just on Rippling, and basically the G&A groups of companies that use Rippling we found were about half of what their peer companies are. So pretty substantial savings in terms of finance, in terms of IT, and in terms of HR, just based on the automation that we're able to provide to the customers.
Yeah, and actually, a decade ago, around this size, I had 8 people on my team.
And how many do you have today?
3. 4, I guess, including me, but yeah.
Can you share a little bit about, if, in your background in consumer products and things, how that ultimately helped you build a better product for managing spreadsheets?
Yeah, thanks. That's a really painful question. So for some background, the investment thesis of Andreessen when in our seed round into the company was, let's take a consumer founder and apply it to an underserved market, and maybe we'll make a lot of money, is effectively the thesis. And as it turns out, it's not quite that simple. And I will say it's been a very painful double-edged sword for me personally. With consumer, you're building for kind of the every person, with you hopefully being the every person, and so you're using a lot of instincts and taste and intuition, and sometimes you get lucky, and if you're lucky, you only have to be right once. With B2B, it's very different. Every company is subtly different. The details matter so much, and so I had to unlearn probably more than I got advantage from like my experience. Unlearn how to talk to customers, because when you're a consumer, you can launch a thing and look at the data and just try different things and A/B test your way. In enterprise, it doesn't work that way. You have to get to that first iota of traction, having that first customer actually live on Runway, and that was deeply painful, both in terms of how long it took, but also your identity as a person, right? I felt valued because I saw myself, and I knew that other people saw myself as a good product person. And over the first year and a half, realizing that's not true actually in this context, and I have to unlearn and rebuild the things that I thought we're good at, really sucked badly. It sucked. So I would say it is a double-edged sword, but if you can get to the other side of it, if you can deconstruct what you're good at and relearn what you need to learn in this new context, you can build something really interesting. And I feel really grateful for the team to get me here.
But it's really part of a broader trend, which is enterprise software has really sucked from a usability standpoint for a very long time, right? And so you coming into this company and doing this, bringing consumer sensibility, is going to change what this product category means. And I think I had a front row seat to this because I was at Slack for 6.5 years prior, and really 100% of that company's success was Stuart's consumer sensibility. I mean, that's what made it. Enterprise companies had tried with Yammer and Chatter and all this stuff, and it's terrible. And then someone came in who really understood usability and consumers and brought that to enterprise. And I think that's a trend. You're going to see that across many categories of software. Previously, really crappy use, but functional software should be really good use. And that's changed also with people's expectations of the software they use every day, kind of requiring that the software they use at work meet that bar.
Yeah, totally. I think what drove me, and I think this has ended up being correct, I think what we probably feel when we look at the products that are out in our world, sometimes I think a lot of us feel, I can't believe anybody would pay money for this, and I must be missing something. That is correct, actually. And you should believe in that. But the other side of this is probably much harder and much more complex than you initially expect. But if you can build that and rely on that, you will build something really valuable because you're not wrong about that.
Similar question, but from a finance perspective, you said you were an Excel jockey who which so often, I'm sorry, how did you both get out of Excel and Google Sheets and then move to Runway, and how did you roll that out across the organization?
Yeah. So from Excel to Sheets, the madness of trying to like send an Excel file to different colleagues and what version, like it was so obvious that Sheets, that was such an instant solve. So that sort of was the like, okay, like even though I don't have as robust hotkey features here, like this, like there's so much value in that, and that sort of collaborative workspace. That got me out of Excel. And then you start building in there, and you start to build complex models in there, and it starts to break, and it's painful. And now you realize, oh God, six cooks in the kitchen working on this thing together, actually it's a different type of chaos, a different type of pain. And so that drove me, I think generally, Siki had mentioned this earlier, there's not a lot of tools like Runway, especially for a company of our size and stage. Most FP&A tools are large, cumbersome, like an Anaplan type S product. And so I wanted to find something that could replace Sheets, but I didn't want to have to hire a person to have to manage it. And I figured there must be something better. And so, through that kind of exploration, found Runway.
And for your business partner?
For everybody else?
How did it come to roll?
Yeah, because there's also a bit of an tool exhaustion of like everyone's got a tool for everything. I kind of force it where, I think I mentioned this earlier, I have a dashboard for every one of our leadership team members, and I walk through in our either weekly or like bi-weekly one-on-ones, like we pull that up and that's what we talk through. It has our quarterly plan on it, it has the annual budget on it, it has all of our assumed forecast expenses, it has all their headcount, and like that's where we talk about what's the risk here? What are we off track against our quarterly targets? Where is the opportunity here? And so I sort of force them into it. But also it's neat because people, I think, are starting to realize that level of insight is really valuable. And so, there isn't that much forcing. It's sort of, once you kind of set up for them and bring them into it, there's also some great functionality of like they can also themselves create their own scenarios, which is also really informative because I can sort of have my own main kind of company-wide sort of canonical plan and still work with them on sort of, more bespoke plans or kind of one-off plans. Yeah.
So he had a question for you. I worked in venture for the last 6 years, and I started my own journey last 7 months ago. And the emotional roller coaster of like, hey, you have a good day with your new startup that you started, you're selling a product, you're getting good feedback from your customers, and they go dark on you for 3 days. And it's like the whole journey of like your emotions going up and your highs are highs and lows are low. How do you, like as a seasoned founder, how do you keep that in check and don't let that burden you out, or also not give up when it gets really fucking hard?
I think it comes from belief. I think if you believe something hard enough, you're willing to spend all the time and effort it takes to make it happen. I think belief is a starting point. But I think what really kept me going is having the right expectations. So a few things that I really tried to do a lot to help me calibrate my expectations. That's probably the thing to help more than most. So if you look at Notion, Figma, Airtable, Coda, even Anaplan back in the day, all of these products that have we consider the modern generation products, each of them took 3.5 to 5 years to get to launch. I think it was like 5 to 6 years before Figma hit 1 million ARR. And so that's kind of how long it takes. And when we raise money for 18 months, our expectations are really different. Dylan Field is actually one of our investors. And we had him come in for lunch and learn early on in Runway's journey. And I'll never forget it. I didn't know what he was going to say, but the last question I asked him during this lunch and learn was, from taking Figma from nothing to where it is today, what is the thing that surprised you the most? And he said, the thing that surprised me the most is how few people made it all the way. And I said, oh, that's interesting. The more I thought about it, the more I thought it was the wildest answer I've ever heard. Because Figma is empirically one of the best private outcomes of all time. And yet, in the early days, this group of very talented people looked left and looked right and said, we're not going to make it. Half of them, and left. And that's just a reality of things. People aren't prepared for how long it's going to take. when we started Runway, we tried to hire the best people that we can, and all of their friends were looking at their friends at OpenAI, killing it. And meanwhile, we had no customers. We couldn't even write a formula. We didn't make a first dollar until like 2.5 years into our journey. And that sucks. And basically, the job of a founder and CEO is to constantly convince people, trust me, people, we are on an exponential growth curve. We're just on a really flat part of it right now. But eventually, we'll get there. You have to cajole, and you have to believe it yourself, and that comes from like a belief in what you're doing. Like, is it meaningful? Do you find joy in it? But it sucks. That's a job.
How do you guys see AI changing the finance function?
There is a lot of low-level, high-volume transactional work within accounting. Reconciling bank accounts, credit card statements. I've yet to see a tool that's fully implemented this, but I'm very confident that the amount of like transactional work within accounting, at least, that should all be automated away, and I think very much will be. I don't think it's come to pass yet. In fact, if someone wants to build a general ledger and destroy QuickBooks, I would be very happy. So I think on the accounting side, there's a lot that can happen there. On the finance side, I think it's really around like insights. How can I leverage AI to derive more insights into what this is doing, what we could do? I think there's some really interesting stuff that's happening there. I know Runway has some really cool AI features, but I think it's still really early days. But I think it will be, for sure on the accounting side, it will automate away most of the manual work. And on the finance side, I think it will kind of act as a sort of another kind of thought partner as to how to best orient the business.
How do you think about timing when it is appropriate for one way? I know you used the phrase product market fit earlier before you need Runway, but that might be very different for very different types of businesses. Now, I just want to push you a little bit in terms of like codifying. Is it a revenue number? Is it a transaction volume number? Is it a complexity of tiers and pricing models? At what stage does it start to really make sense? And then after you answer that question, at what point does it break? I'm curious if you know, like looking far enough ahead of you, at some point it might break.
I can honestly say that the last one is easier. It hasn't broken yet. It will surely break at some point. We don't know when, but the first part is easier. So we target the mid-market, and we define that as from 50 full-time employees, about 1,200. And generally, you will have a full-time finance person in place. And actually, that's probably the flag, is like your pain with finance is sufficiently high that you want to hire a person to do it, is when it makes sense. And I would look at it as sort of this 2D graph of, one, how complex the business is, and usually FTEs is a pretty good, correlates with that pretty well. And the other axis is like the complexity of the business itself, like of the market, right? If you're doing retail or hardware or supply chain, that's going to be a lot more complicated than doing a SaaS business. And so at some intersection between the two, you will find the pain high enough to adopt something where the spreadsheet doesn't scale anymore. And so the three particular pains that you want to look for, so that will motivate someone to use this. And so like, before I say that, when you are looking for something on Runway, it should not be something that we need to sell you on, or you're looking for something cool. Like, the customers that find Runway helpful, like Superhuman, they're experiencing real pain already. And the three most common types of pain that is happening that is so acute, the first one is there's so much data across more data sources, right? You have your general ledger, you have HRS, you have your data warehouse, you have CRM, and all of that becomes just time-consuming to keep your spreadsheet up to date. The second thing is you have more people in your company across different departments, and you need to report out, you need to get information from people. That becomes more complex. And the third thing is you have more product lines, more customer segments, more geographies. It's a higher dimensional, multi-dimensional modeling problem. Excel is not a multi-dimensional modeling tool. And so those are like the three key problems that eventually get so acute that you're looking for something.
You should start using Rippling way before then.
I mean, I think unlike Runway, the great thing about Rippling is like you can use that from day one. And we generally don't recommend using Runway from day one. Like, we will get there eventually, but that's just like not that important, frankly. Like, you want to build something people want. Thanks for coming.